Okay, so a second Vaad, first Vaad in Emunah, page Resh Peches, and he quotes a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which I think is a good place to start when we talk about Emunah, because what do we need for Emunah is going to be the question. Is it philosophical? Is it some sort of epiphany that we're waiting for? Rabbi Lazar Omer, Havishtor l'mod Torah, you should be diligent in Torah study, V'dama shetashiv l'apikoros, and know how to respond to an apikores. V'da l'fnei miyata amel, and know before whom you are toiling. Umi hu ba'al malachtecha shalem lecha schar polosecha. And know who is your master, who's going to pay you your due payments. So I think what we're going to zero in over here is on. I'm pretty sure that I didn't read this beforehand. Apologize for that, but I saw this recently. Then we're going to zero in on the idea of know how to respond to an apikoros. What does that mean? Which, interestingly, I once pointed this out in Shur. It doesn't say respond to an apikoros. Mm-hmm. You have to just know what to respond. It doesn't say engage in polemics with apikorosim. It says know what to respond, but don't necessarily respond. Mm-hmm. Either way, let's see what he says here. This is Rabbi ben Arach. Who zeh she'amar shaderech tov sheyider bo adam hu leiv tov. So we have earlier that the 5 students were all sent out to find what's the proper path in life, or what's the best avenue, what's the best approach in life. And Rabbi Lazar says a good heart, v'yadua, and it's known, ki shloshat advarim shekol hacham b'tamid Reb Yochanan ben Zakkai amar heim haderech eich madim lo'oto ma'ala shelada'atam tzarich lidabek ba. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked his students, find the proper midah that a person should cleave to. And each one of them, one can say is a shachen tov, or chaver tov, or right? Mm-hmm. And Rabbi Lazar says leiv tov. And then in their respective mishnahs, they actually outline the way to actually get that. So Rabbi Lazar ben Arach, who says leiv tov, in this mishnah, he tells you how to get a leiv tov. Mm-hmm. Nimtza, thus we conclude, Ki Rabbi Lazar, he tavel fanenu, he placed before us et haderech, the way, keter magim leiv tov, how we get to leiv tov. Fine. How so? So what does he say? Study Torah diligently, know how to respond to the apikoros, and know who before whom you're toiling and here's your boss. Anu mevinim ki yashtidal limud Torah ve'idal v'nei miyam elim usukalim lavienu l'leiv tov. It makes sense how the first and the last bring us to a leiv tov, right? The first, which is diligence, Torah study, and last, which is a knowledge before whom we are toiling, that will bring us to a leiv tov. Achma inyan da masha tashiv lapikoros lekan. What does knowing how to respond to the apikoros, how does that contribute to a leiv tov? Hayim gam zed arush k'dei lagia leiv tov. Is this also needed to get it to a leiv tov? Amnam, however, kach anu tzrichim lavin varav. That's how we have to understand what he's saying. V'hinei. Oh, this is it. Rabbi Lazar Eino Omer Tashiv L'Apikoros. It doesn't say respond in Apikoros. Ki ein lanu leitvakeach klalim kofrim. We shouldn't argue with kofrim, with heathens. Kavanatohi, rather, his intention is Ata ba'atzmecha. You yourself tzarich ladat mahalach baruch b'emunatecha. You have to know a proper approach, a clear approach in your emunah. שתהי כל כך חזק בידעתך שאפילו כל רוחות שבלם באות ונשבות בך לא יזיזו אותך ממקומך. It has to be so strong and so resolute that no matter what comes, no matter what winds come, it won't move you from your place.
Please hold for a moment.
I think I like my version of...
I think his Wi-Fi is pretty bad.
Emunah tzricha להתבסס גם בשכל. Emunah needs to be based also in seichel. Va'az hi vada'it legamri. Then there's a certainty to it. Vada'ut kazot be'emunah hi behechlet derech la'adiyah l'leiv tov. Having such certainty in emunah is a clear way, or it's a certain way to reach a leiv tov. איננו חייבים כלל לבסס אמונתנו בטענות פילוסופיות ובמחקר מעמיק. Oh, so do we need to go and like seek out empirical data to try to prove our emunah? So he says no. We don't need to have philosophical arguments. First cause, all those arguments like. Those are like mind-numbing arguments that don't really get anyone anywhere. It doesn't bring you to real emunah. And we don't have to have like the deep analysis or something like that. All we have to use is our simple intellect to bring us to emunah. A lot of people try to say, if you twist your brain into a pretzel, then you come up with kfirah. That's how to come up with kfirah. That's the way to do it. Like, if someone has a baby, either as a dad or as a mom, but if you have a baby and you don't believe in emunah, you're nuts. Yeah. You're crazy. But if you overthink it, then you'll actually conclude, wow, what do you mean? This thing happens all the time. Cells replicate and whatever. But ironically, the more sophisticated thought will actually bring you further away from the truth and not closer to the truth. And ironically...
More sophisticated thought or more doting on the same thought?
No, more sophisticated. More like trying to overthink it. When we're trying to overthink it, we're assuming we're able to think about the way the Almighty works, right? So if we come up with some sort of clever way to explain it all, and we do that, what happens, right?
Yeah. If you explain
it. Then we explain it, and suddenly you don't need the Almighty for it. If we could we can't really wrap our heads around the way the Almighty did things. We can't.
Yeah.
So we try to understand it on a technical, granular level, and we go awry. Haseichel habari, healthy intellect, does not. We're in the third line of the second paragraph. Does not have a hard time to understand the imperative that the Almighty created the world. Number one, Natana Tatorah gave us the Torah, Min Hashemayim, V'yavi et ha'geula, and will bring the redemption. By the way, if you notice what we spoke about last week, the three times when we have Emunah, creation, Matan Torah, and Geula, he inserts it in over here. Aval, lo nuchal lachsoch l'chol ma'amin et latet da'ato al bisus ha'mato b'derech seichel. But we will not exonerate every ma'amin or prevent or preclude every believer the tirch, the toil, to actually establish his emunah with his seichel. So we have to find this middle line where we're using our intelligence to have that as a foundation for our emunah, but we're not getting philosophical and trying to draw straws and asking philosophical questions that there's no answer to. Oh, there's an infinite amount of space between my two hands, right? Because if you slice it in half and in half and in half and in half, you can never end, right? Mind blown. How can we ever go there from my head, right? Yeah. You heard that question? That's nonsense, right? It's nonsense. Yeah. But that's what you hear in philosophy classes in university, right? And it doesn't bring you anywhere closer to any truth. It doesn't. Nothing could prove anything, right? That's what they say, right? Nothing could prove anything. No, there's a lot of things can prove anything, right? Nevuah, for example, proves everything.
I hear.
Correct? And we know things, when you try to overthink situations, you come up with what we say in yeshiva as krumkeit.
Right. They try though. There's all these classes and books and Aish gives a
it doesn't work. No one comes from them. No one.
What's it called?
No one comes from it.
That's all it is, Rabbi Schroeder. That's
Well, I think what it could do, it could remove obstacles for someone's path towards Torah. But no one's I'm proven,
There's always a leap of faith at the end. Rabbi Kellerman also has permission to believe that's that thing. He's you get down.
But that's different. That's more reasonable, logical. That's just presenting things that people could get to on their own. But they're trying to say Bible codes or some sort of
gematria, Baal Turin.
Yeah, stuff like that. That doesn't work. It doesn't impress me. Like it doesn't impress you. It doesn't impress anyone. I was like, oh, you proved it because there's 11,000 letters between Amalek. You heard that one, and that's the same amount of letters as there is between Gillis Esther. Whoa, mind blown. No, it isn't actually. It doesn't mean anything. You agree with me, Eric?
Yeah, that's what Rabbi Rosenberg used to always say, and he used to be not a big fan of Esher Torah for that exact reason.
Well, I'm saying I think there is a place for it. I'm not going to try to get involved with Machlokas and Rabbi Rosenberg and Rabbi Weinberg. But
that's a very smart thing.
That's a very smart thing to do. But from my experience, I think it's a very nice thing. And it's a complementary thing. But it's not a core. Mm-hmm. It's not a core fulcrum. I don't know if it's the right word or not.
It doesn't cause people to change their lives.
That's right, like a lever.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
Apex point.
Yeah. Fulcrum. Fine. So he's trying to tell us to straddle that line. Our intention here is not to delineate all the ways that we can verify the Emunah with Seichel. Everyone's doing that on their own.
But you do need Seichel to get to Emunah, right? Just not too much.
No, he doesn't say you need Seichel to get to Emunah. He says that your Emunah should be based on Seichel. So you might get it. You might get it some other way, but once you have the Emunah, you want to make sure it has a solid foundation.
It's not just emotional.
He means it's yeah, but it could be that that's how you got there. Mm-hmm. But once you're there, you want to buttress it with Seichel. Mm-hmm. It's not saying that the only avenue towards Emunah is via Seichel.
Yeah,
but it's saying that your Emunah should be grounded with Seichel.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Nistapek b'ramazim achadim. We will do with just singular or a few hints. Everyone should take time for himself to validate his Emunah as per his ability. It should be simple, But he should know that without seichel, without thought, his Emunah will remain cloudy, and it will be only of maaseh avosav biyado, which means he's just doing what his grandparents did him. And you say, oh, what's wrong with that? And the maaseh, there really isn't a lot wrong with that. And the Rambam even says, in Mor Nevuchim talks about how this is a level of Emunah where you just have faith based upon tradition. Mm-hmm. But there's two problems with that. First of all, you don't have damash atash l'apikoros. You won't know how to respond to an apikoros because an apikoros doesn't care about your tradition. Mm-hmm. Your tradition doesn't hold water in a debate. That's number one. And number two is that your tradition, when you come in conflict with opposition to that tradition, you may actually reject your tradition because your tradition, they were hoodwinking you. And therefore,
I think you could get a hetzer to do what your grandfather did, but you're the only one.
I'm sorry. What?
I said you could get a hetzer to just do what your grandfather did, but only you, since he wrote the Sefer Yizim. I'm just teasing you.
No, but the fact that your grandfather believed something, it doesn't mean it's true, right? So, like, you have Muslims that believe what their grandparents believe. Now, it's a nice, lucky coincidence. It's a happy coincidence that we're right. It's like when you accidentally, it's like the guy who doesn't know how to play the game and just happens to have this beginner luck and just knows what to do. Like, it's just pushing buttons, right?
Yeah.
They had no idea what's going on, just pushing buttons, and like they're the best.
Fighting games.
Yeah, there was a story recently about a girl who had no idea about football, and she won a parlay of 12 games. She just went to Vegas and put $5, says this team, that team, she picked whatever colors she liked, no clue who was what, and she won a huge amount of money, $30,000 or something like that, because you got them all right.
Well, you see people do that in the March Madness.
Yeah. You have no idea, exactly. And you know what? The people that know nothing often are better at the one, right? So we're like that as well. We happen to be that lucky guy that happens to not think about it and get it right. because you happen to be Jewish and you happen to be right.
So true.
But the question is, like, if that's all that you're basing it upon, then essentially you're no different than the Muslims. Because the Muslims also, they're just doing what their parents told them.
Yeah.
And how could you blame them? How can you look down upon them when you're essentially following the same path? Okay.
We came first.
Well, it doesn't matter, so what? But we could have been wrong, right? גם ברמזים שנסתיר בהם אנו מוותרים על כל ציוד מלומד וראיות הלקוחות ממצאי המדע החדיש. Oh, I like this as well. He's like, we're not going to use like these new age scientific proofs. Oh, science discovers Genesis. None of that nonsense. כי כוונתנו להעמיד אמונתנו על השכל הפשוט והבריא שהוא מנת חלקו של כל אדם. Because we want to work based upon seichel, which is not a result of scientific discovery, just what everyone can reach on their own. Now, he's not rejecting the idea of using established or newly discovered science as a means for Emunah, but what he's doing over here is he's saying that this is something which is shaval chol nefesh. This is universal and boundless to time. So even before the discovery of Newtonian physics or Einstein's discoveries or the Big Bang, all that we could have reached the Emunah. Someone mentioned. I remember I had a guy in Kolo who said, there's a new sefer called Bilvavi Mishkan Evna.
Yeah.
You guys know that sefer? Know that sefer? Mm-hmm. Okay, it's this this new guy who's like, this is the best sefer, and the guy's, it's like it's taking over the world, right?
Rabbi Gamazin was talking about it today.
Okay, so this guy in Kolo says, the Rambam is evidence that you could become an Adam Gadol without Bilvavi Mishkan Evna. That's what he said. Obviously, because the Bilvavi Mishkan Evna was written, 10 years ago, right? That's what he said. I think it's.
The new book is saying based on new technology and new evidence.
No, it's just it's a wonderful sefer.
No, he's speaking to people in our generation. Maybe they have a different type of emotional connection.
Whatever. I'm not trying to denigrate the sefer in any way. I'm just saying that our Emunah. It's not like today post the discovery of the Big Bang we can have Emunah when no one else really could have had. Mm-hmm. This thing that apparently someone mentioned Schroeder earlier, right? So Schroeder has this whole theory about the 6 days of creation.
Lines up. That's where my dad stays from.
Well, 6 days of creation, and that actually is 15 billion years or 13 billion years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's actually not his theory.
Really?
Yeah.
It's Rambam.
Well, it's not a... Is it a Rambam?
It's sort of like when he talks about Hiyuli.
Oh, Ramban.
Oh, the Ramban, the Hiyuli. But that's... Okay, but the Ramban doesn't talk about time.
Well, he sort of talks about how there's no sun.
Well, the Big Bang idea, but not the amount of time that elapsed.
Right, that's true.
The idea of all matter being on day one that the Ramban mentions. But either way, where does that come from? Where's the earliest
Of time or what?
Of that time idea? That comes from a book written in 1976. Book that I actually have a copy of. It's called Challenge on the Complement of Torah and Science. And there was an essay there written by Reb Shimon Schwab. Shimon Schwab was one of the biggest rabbanim in America. He was a rabbi in Germany as well. And he wrote this article. And he was the one who discovered this idea.
Oh, the math lining up with the 15 billion years?
The math? Well, the whole idea of how 5,000 years and change could actually be, plus 6 days could actually be 15 billion years or 13 billion years, whatever they want to say. Because how time could be viewed differently.
With mathematics, or he just said it?
No, I mean, this is 10 years after the Big Bang discovery. He did the same argument.
Yeah.
Where, we have the Big Bang, and if you actually work backwards, we have 15 billion years. But actually, so do we have with our 6 days plus 5,776 years. Which is interesting. It's not just some sort of, theologian or some sort of guy who this is the frum guy who came out of MIT, we have to listen to him, right?
Yeah.
He wears a kippah, right? It's Shimon Schwab, which is...
Rabbi Rosenberg's wife's father.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Be'emunah brura... Be'emunah b'borei olam dai lanu ma shekosav ha'Rambam. It's enough for us what the Rambam wrote, Ech motza Avram Avinu olav shalom et haderech la'emunah. If you really want Emunah, all you need is through the Rambam in the first chapter of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, where he tells us how Avram Avinu reached the Emunah.
What line are we on?
We do the last line.
The last line on Reish Pei Chet.
Did we?
The Emunah Babora?
Is it
Yeah.
possible
Yes.
we skipped
No, we didn't.
Kavanah Sinu?
No, we didn't.
Oh,
I can read it again, but we
okay.
didn't skip it.
Okay.
I said that it's universal. Remember, I said it's universal.
Oh, okay.
So it's universal.
Oh,
So
okay,
so the kavanah, the intention is that it should be for everyone, not just for people that are privy to newfound scientific discoveries.
Okay, right.
Fine. So last line here. B'emunah bor olam. With regards to Emunah and the Bor Olam, Dailan Mashkas of Rambam, it's enough for what the Rambam wrote. Eich Matzah Avram Avinu of Shalom, how Avram Avinu of blessed memory found Haderech Lemunah, the way to Emunah. Vehevenu is Dvara Bavad according. We brought his words in the previous Vaad. I after Sha'olam Barat Hatzmo. It's not possible for the world to have created itself. Hadvarim Brurim Upshutim. The things are clear and simple. Vinodama Shekasav Hakuzri Sheshaltam Chachos Hamelach. So the Kuzri writes, Ha'ata miyachez zos ha'chachma nimtzeis bebriya hanimla el galgal o el kolchav o el zulasam mibilti bore. So the scholar, the sage, is asking the Kuzri king, do you say that the same wisdom that created the ant to be a constellation or a star or something that's not the creator? Amar Kuzri. So what does the Kuzri say? Zemiyuchos al pol hateva. This goes back to the cause of teva. Amar Chavru Mao Teva. So what's Teva? What's Amar Kuzri? Hu koach mar kochos al ma she shamanu b'chochmos ve'enu yedemahu. What's Teva? Teva is some nature. Nature. It's something on its own. It's this power that it has its own domain. Ava chachamim yodim also b'li safek. Amar Chacham. Aval yidiasam bo tidiasenu. So if we're trying to give this new domain that we call nature, or the dominion of nature, then we can't just rely on the scientists. Oh, they know. They could figure this whole dilemma, this whole enigma out. So what happened here? Gazer also philosoph. You guys have an extra word there? Cut off by me. Gazer also philosoph. I guess it's a philosopher. Ki hu aschala v'asiba asher bo yanuach v'yanua adavar asher bo be'etzem v'lo b'mikra. Okay, so let's see what's going on over here. I'm not sure exactly what he's trying to bring out over here. Amar Kruzim Kain ani roe she hit onu b'shemos ele v'shemonu mishtatfim im habore. So they're mixing up with names here, and they're counting other powers along with the Almighty. But Marno Teva Chacham Paul, that the Teva is this wise creator. Ve'efsher shenova lomo bore al tam divreim. Amar Chacham Kainhu. I think what he's saying is like this: what you call nature, we call God. B'derech agav.
Just so you know, I have notes here.
Go ahead.
In this section, it's basically he's going to split up the next three sections between the Kuzari speaking about nature and basically if you just think about the brilliance of the logic, logically it makes sense by just pondering the world, kind of like Abraham Avinu did. The second section's coming next is about Torah.
Yeah, I see the next chapter and the last chapter.
It's about prophecy.
That's right.
So
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure what he brought from the Kuzri is that the idea that what you call nature, we call God. We're just trying to find other names, but how does nature work on its own? Like, how does it create stuff?
He realized it through nature. I guess it's like
Yeah. But Derech Agav, as a side note, Yemer Khan, let it say over here, he's Besefer Kuzri Labuda Alevi, Mitbarim Kol Itre Emunah. In the Sefer of the Kuzri of Rebuda Alevi, becomes clear or explained all the foundations of Emunah. And it's important for everyone to learn it. Hagra Amar, the Gra said, everyone knows what the Gra is, right? Lilmod Sefer Kuzri Markom Shar Yichud B'Sefer Chovas Avavos Mitamzeh, to learn the Sefer HaKuzri instead of Shar HaYichud and Chovas Avavos. Ule'inyanenu, and with regards to what we're saying here, Hashem Teva, the word Teva, or the name Teva, who bitum Shechel Alev, that's something that that's a name, that's an expression, that's a term that draws the heart. Hamechaseh b'shitchiyut nora'ah, that covers with terrifying superficiality et hachachma hanora'ah hagluma b'toch b'riyah, the wondrous wisdom that is found in the world, in the Bria. Shelo yitachen b'shum ofen, it's not possible in any way shebeolam sheb'mahalach tiv'i bli shebeolam shemahalach tiv'i bli ruach chaim u'bli magama tachlitit yibara olam niflat hazeh. It's impossible that a world, quote unquote, that's just nature without the spirit of life and without a goal and a direction of purpose will create this world. Ein avilut gedolah machshava. There's no perversion that is worse than this thought. The idea of a world creating itself, or a world being rudderless and purposeless and just happening, and it's so fantastic and so wonderful and so it's so nuanced and so dramatic and so wonderful in every way. I think that's a very powerful argument. I know that we call this the design argument. Mm-hmm. I think there's a Gemara somewhere that says, I think it was Rabbi Akiva was having an argument with some Roman scholar, philosopher, whatever, and he said to him, like, who created the world? So he looked at his shirt. He said, who created your shirt? So what do you mean? There was a tailor who created it. Said, the same thing. You see design. You see designer. It's simple. No one in a million years would think that your shirt happened on its own, right? But it's not so sophisticated. You know why? We could do it ourselves. In a world that we can't do, or any one of the creatures that we cannot do, we assume that it's insane.
I just have trouble with that argument logically.
Why?
I think it's like majorly flawed.
Which argument?
The watchmaker argument. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because you find a watchmaker in the desert, right? So obviously somebody made it. A watch. Sorry, a watchmaker. You find a watch in the desert. Obviously somebody made it. I didn't know, because you look at the desert around it. The watch is much more sophisticated than the desert around it. But when you look at the universe, we have nothing to compare it to. We have nothing to say that this is tohu, whatever it is. This is nothing, and this is now much more complex. We don't know without Hashem what it would look like.
Well, but it clearly shows a creator. It means the watchmaker argument only proves that there's a watchmaker, right?
But why? Because it's a watch that you found is much more complex than the desert around it. But if you look at the world, it is everything.
I don't know where you got that from.
It is.
No, is that the argument?
No. Well, why is?
I'll explain it to you quite simply. Ready? Okay.
By the way, Aaron, do you think it's my connection or your connection?
I think it's yours. Well, actually I don't know that, but your what do you call it? Your video.
Okay, so like this. Is it easier to make things as an engineer trying to do it or not trying to do it?
Of course, trying.
Of course, right? That's right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you see something that you cannot make, if you even try to do it, can you imagine in your wildest imagination that what would happen if you didn't try to do it?
But we don't know what the world would look like if no one tried. Meaning, you can look.
We do know. You know why?
I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm trying to sound like
I understand. I'm saying my point of this is a very simple argument. No one in the right mind, you ask a billion people in the world, will think that this happened on its own. No one, even though it could have, right? There's naturally occurring, right?
Why not? What is it about that you would say somebody made it?
Huh?
What is it about that?
Well, we see design, we see function, we see purpose.
You recognize what it is,
huh?
Because you recognize that this is something that people make.
No, even if I never saw something, if you show kids in Africa an iPad, they've never seen one before.
You look at an asteroid floating in space. What about that shows a creator?
Well, forget about that.
Okay.
Forget about that. Forget about the asteroid for a second, right? But you see a pen, no one, even if they're crazy, they won't say that it happened on its own. But this is something we can make. Vaharaya, we made it. Correct? Can humans make pens?
Can who?
Can humans make pens?
Yeah, sure.
They can, right?
Yeah.
Yet no one would say this, and no one will be convinced in a million years that this would be something that happened on its own.
Okay.
But we can't make livers, and we can't make cats, and we can't make any of these. We can't make anything, nothing. We can't make matter. We can't, right? All the things that we can't make, and that we imagine happened on its own.
Theoretically.
But theoretically, you would say this to be made on its own as well. And this we can make, and no one would say that this to be made on its own.
I guess theoretically it could also, but we know this one wasn't.
No, so what? Huh?
It says Bic on it.
If it didn't say Bic on it, you would think that it made its own?
But
like this, you imagine it would made its own?
No, the reason why I know this was made by somebody was because I know that people make cups. I recognize people make cups.
So if I showed you something that you never saw before in your life?
So if it defied all means of what I know people create things with shapes and with stuff, right? Let's say if you're doing scuba diving. Hold on, Steve. Hold on.
Go ahead.
So if you're scuba diving, the way you know a man underwater can't see a whole lot, right? How do you know if something's man-made, a wreck versus something else? You look for straight lines because in nature things aren't dead straight. When you find a dead straight line under the water, it's usually that's a man-made thing. So people look for straight lines when you scuba dive to find wrecks and stuff like that. So if you show me something that I didn't recognize has a straight line on it, I might think that. Hold on. Oh, she's gonna delete all the pictures on my phone. You might think that someone else created it.
That someone else created it. That's not a human?
You look at her to bed about this.
Yeah.
I'm saying I recognize that humans make certain types of things. So if it's that type of thing, I would think a human made it.
But humans can only make certain type of things, but sometimes we can't make even if we tried.
Yeah,
it means we can make straight lines, we girls make squiggly lines.
We can't make the moon. We can't make the moon.
I agree.
But how do we know something else made it?
Well, because it's something that we can't make.
You're saying everything has to have a maker. So we can't make it.
No, I'm saying either it has a maker or it happened on its own. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So something that we cannot make if we tried, how could it happen on its own? That's exactly my argument.
The scale of things. We can't do a lot of things. Doesn't mean that it's by definition made by someone else. You said it could
Forget about scale. Forget about the constellations. There are things that are very small, like flies.
No, but what you're saying is that because anything we can't do, someone else did.
No. Anything that we can do, right, is more sophisticated than something we
Not
can
necessarily.
do. Of course it is.
No.
Of course it is.
We can't create the moon. It's not
Forget
more
about the moon.
sophisticated. I'm thinking something.
Forget about the moon. I'm talking about a fly.
You pick something different. That happens
I'm
to be more
picking-
complex. There are things less complex.
Huh?
That happens to be more complex, but there are things that are less complex than what we can create.
I agree, but it's a different problem because it's outside of our realm. So let's take that. I mean, it's in a different scale, correct? So let's forget about that. Just look at a fly, a simple fly that you see billions of them in your life, and billions of them exist, and hundreds of millions of them exist, right? You can't make it no matter what. The best engineers on the planet all together try to make a fly that's self-replicating, and we can't do it.
Okay.
Why would you imagine that if there's millions of people that they all tried, and all of human collection of human effort cannot produce one of those things? Why would you assume that it happened on its own when you would never assume that something that is infinitely less complex happened on its own? That's the argument.
Because things are, it's again devil's advocate, whatever. I mean,
Go ahead.
That nature does work in a way that it creates things of
Really, where have you
structure.
seen? Where have you seen things? Where have you seen that?
All over. Pick all of your examples. A fly.
Who said nature created it? It's nonsense.
I'm
arguing that
That's what
point.
you say, but I'm saying like
How does nature create something by itself when something we can't create? Right?
if you take a pile of metal magnets, right? Take them all over. You throw them into a room. They go into a nice little ball when you get there. by itself. It worked by itself. I mean,
Who designed that?
Something you could say God, but I'm saying like, but you don't see it in the
There's no
numbers.
function there. That's
Right.
not a good example. There's so much function.
It's creating structure out
so
of
much
no
utility.
structure.
So much utility.
I'm saying it's a time where it creates structure out of no structure without anyone doing it. It's a God, but I'm saying like besides that.
But structure in the form of a clump of magnets is not anywhere near a structure that you would need to produce a fly, a single fly.
No, but it shows you
self-replicating.
that nature itself can make things more structured.
Well, that's against the second law of thermodynamics.
That's why magnets are magical.
Right? What's the second law of thermodynamics?
Well, one is that
Entropy,
not created
right?
or destroyed. Well,
That things get less organized over time.
no, I know, but still, you're picking the things that are more complex.
Well, that's my point. Well, we have so many of those things.
Pick a rock. A rock's less complex. We can't make a rock.
Okay, so I agree. Because we can't make any matter, right?
Yeah.
We can only take matters and form matter. And also, by the way, I'm saying, I think this is a very good argument. I don't know why I'm saying, I think that the argument makes sense, though. That's what I think. I think it makes a lot of sense. Like, if something that you would never in a million years imagine happened on its own, because you see form, right? You see a bottle, you see a sweater. Like, these things don't happen on their own. How could something that we cannot do happen on its own? It's more complex.
So it happens on a daily basis all over the place.
No, it doesn't.
But we would say it's Hashem, and someone else would say
Where
it's
does
not.
that happen?
Have a baby. People,
But the having a baby, that's because you're using pre-existing materials, right?
yeah, I'm saying so.
that doesn't solve a problem. That's because you already have a baby-producing material in existence, correct? You didn't produce a baby. You didn't make a baby. You're existing within the framework of humans produce babies.
Well, nothing else. I mean, matter can't be created or destroyed, right? So everything's the same. Doesn't change. We can't help that. Can't get around the fact that it's already here. The matter's already here. The stuff's already here.
I know, but it's not just taking stuff, right? You could take humans and like buy it all in a drugstore for $4, right? Right? Of course.
Parts.
Yeah, we're mostly water, right? That doesn't mean that because it's the same amount of matter, that's the human, correct?
No, but
you can't just take like a bucket of water. It's like the guy who commits the murder. It's like, oh, I'll replace it. Here's a bucket of water. This is like 50 liters of water, and I'll give you that, and I'll give you now a carbon or whatever nonsense. And now you have a human. No, you don't. That's not what a human is.
Another argument you're making, but I think there's a leap of logic in there, in that you're saying that anything more complex than what we can make must have been made by something more complex than us, basically, because if we couldn't have made it, then...
No, that's not my point. My point is it's illogical to assume, when we wouldn't assume that something that we can make we would never assume that something that we can make happened on its own. Why would we assume that something that we cannot make happened on its own? It's illogical.
Well, it's not, but on its own, I'm saying meaning with forces of nature. You're saying on its own meaning like with entropy, meaning like...
No, even with the forces of nature. It's the argument of, like, can you imagine that a 747 would be made because of a tornado flying through a junkyard? Would you imagine that?
No, but that's different, though.
Why not?
I didn't find one.
Oh, I'm sorry? You have flown on jet airplanes, right?
Yeah.
Is it possible, theoretically, that a tornado can go through a junkyard and produce... Theoretically, yes, right?
Sure.
But you would never imagine that, right?
No.
Okay, you wouldn't, right? Now, something that's much more complex...
We change it, though. If they started finding, whenever there's a tornado around, they start finding 747s out of nowhere.
Which they have.
We start my thinking, like, hey, maybe something
we never found those 747s.
No, but we
anywhere.
keep seeing flies, and we keep seeing octopuses and all the other animals around. Like,
But that's not because of tornadoes. That's because they exist. Huh?
Aaron, you've convinced me. I'm not going to watch anymore. I'm going to go just do something.
We can finish.
No, you convinced me. I'm out of here, buddy.
I'll see you at the club.
No, actually, I don't hear your argument, Aaron, because like Lamaisa, like if a person, it's like that thing what's that famous thing like somebody tries to argue that a monkey knocked over a thing.
Well, Shakespeare, yeah.
The Mona Lisa or something.
Yeah.
Have you heard that one?
Yeah.
Well, that's the Kuzri. The Kuzri writes that no one would imagine that you would take an inkwell and throw it up and it'll make a letter. Or
yeah.
Like when you look at an eyeball and you see like the brilliance, the intricacy that it takes with the rods and the cones and Like,
no, I agree. I agree. It's incredibly complex. What I'm saying is, though, it takes away. What we're saying is that you take away any ability for any force of nature or what do you call it, like evolution to do this. It's only either we do it, or if it's more complex, it must be that God did it because it doesn't happen by itself. The statement doesn't happen by itself is where I'm saying it's a bit of a leap, because there could be forces, and people say, I mean, most scientists would say there are forces called evolution and forces of nature that do create things more complex than what are around otherwise. You have, bacteria that have nothing, a certain base level, and after, they're around antibiotics, for example, that start taking on other abilities and evolving.
But I don't think I don't think that response answers the core question.
What?
I don't think the response answers the question. It means the argument, I think, is still very logical, especially when I couch the argument as follows.
It's a very logical argument, but it has certain definitions for certain terms. But I'm saying you could maybe say something different.
Okay, but remember, once we're challenging, our logical arguments, let's certainly challenge the illogical arguments, correct? Like evolution. So the fact that a lot of people say doesn't mean anything, right? They could all be wrong, right?
No, there's the argument. I don't go too far off topic.
Huh?
I think we're spending way too much time on a
actually not off topic. This is.
I think it's very much on topic.
This is the topic.
I mean, I'll keep talking about it, but ST.
It's okay with me.
No, my argument is like this: if you forget about what's real, right? If you would never in a million years be convinced that this happened on its own, you wouldn't, right?
But dafka that, not a fly. Dafka that.
Why?
Because I see these being made all the time. I've never found one in nature before.
You never found one of them.
A pen in nature. If I started finding pens in nature, that and really no one made it for some reason.
Who says you don't? Who says what's the difference when you find it in nature? What does that mean? You find it? You find flies everywhere. Not in nature.
If we traveled to the moon and found the pen, and we found and bottom of the ocean where nothing, we knew it wasn't human made. We found a natural made pen. That sort of thing. Maybe.
No, you wouldn't. That would be.
Why I would never
that would be the first thought. Oh, this happened on its own. Of course not.
No, it started happening more often. You're saying you would never say this happened on its own. I agree, but dafka this because the pen. Or this iPhone.
But
a rock, I might think happened on its own.
Forget about the rock. I don't want.
You keep going to dafka the more complex ones. Say the less complex too. Show me all of it.
I understand, but the proof that I'm trying to bring is from the complexity, from the complex ones, from the fact that you would never be convinced, even if you found it on the moon, you would assume that one of the Russians dropped it there, right? You wouldn't think that it happened on its own. You wouldn't.
Yeah.
Right? And certainly not if you found it, I don't know, in your couch, right?
The question is, could there be some other force, though?
The question is, what's the simplest argument? The simplest argument is that this was created by someone.
Yeah.
And therefore, the logic extends that something that's more complex than this was created as well by someone or by something.
Well, it's simple because you fill in all the gaps by saying there's a big creator that created everything else. So it's a nice gap filler.
Well, that's true, but it's logical. We're using the logical... Because otherwise you'll fill it with some other gap creator that evolution created it, which also doesn't exist. Not also, but that doesn't exist.
Well, but in other words, we see the changes happening.
No, we don't see changes happening.
Yeah, we do.
No, we don't.
Yeah, we do.
No, we don't.
What do you mean by changes?
Like evolutionary changes.
No, you don't see that.
In the form of creating new organisms? How many new organisms have we chronicled?
Not new, I'm saying changes.
How many new organisms have we chronicled?
But not jumping.
No, I agree. I'm not trying to argue evolution over Hashem.
Well, I haven't seen any evolution changes in the form of new organisms. I haven't seen any.
Okay, well, I agree.
There isn't any. There isn't any. We see changes in size or changes in this and changes in that, but all that can be a result of pre-programmed software. That's not necessarily evolution. As if there's an engine. We haven't seen any of it. The fact that you get tan because you go on vacation doesn't mean that the fly created itself or evolution created the fly. There's no evidence of that. And it's certainly the more illogical approach. I think it's ironclad, rock solid here. I really do.
I hear. I mean, I believe in Hashem, so I agree with you.
No, but it's such a logical argument. It's so simple.
Well, it's simple because it fills in, like I said, it fills in the gap that everything that we didn't create must be created by Hashem.
No, everything. The more complex something is, the more likely you are to say that it had a designer or a creator.
Well, logically, though, the thing is, things like evolution and things like natural selection, they do make logical sense.
I'm just curious. To have free will, they have to make sense to have free will.
It doesn't make any sense to me. Sorry.
Okay, so then you don't have free will.
You have free will. What your free will is...
You don't.
No, your free will is This is the Nakuda. Your free will is, are you going to allow your taivas to overcome overwhelming evidence and hang your hat on nonsensical arguments like evolution or not? There is free will, of course, but not logical free will.
No, but I don't know if it's nonsensical. It's just that there's a bigger picture thing going on. It's like blaming the stick for hitting the dog instead of the person holding the stick. I mean, evolution, natural selection could be right. It doesn't mean that there's not Hashem.
No, evolution, natural selection is wrong. It's wrong because it's illogical.
It's not logical, though.
I think it is illogical.
A lot of brilliant people, intelligent people, think it's logical.
A lot of brilliant people thought that bowing down to figurines was logical as well. And in fact, some of the most brilliant people in the world, and some of many Jews, why would they do that? So the Gemara says, the Gemara unlocks the secret. The Gemara unlocks the secret. The Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara says that the Jews always knew that there was no substance in Avodah Zarah. So why they do it? Lahater lahem arayis b'farhesya. All they wanted was a rayas. Problem is you can't have a rayas in the base medrash, right? So therefore, the only way they could do it is if they have Avodah Zarah. But let me ask you a question: did they know of their own biases? Probably not. No one knows their own biases. How do you know you don't know what you're biased to? That's why you're biased.
You probably know you do.
That's why you're biased. So they would bow down to the Avodah Zarah thinking, Eilo Lekacha Yisrael, right? That's what they thought, even though the real motivation was the arayas. So the fact that a lot of brilliant people believe something doesn't mean that it's more logical.
I always thought much more like...
Whenever you have biases, it doesn't matter what your logic is, and I'll prove to you. You know some of the most brilliant people in the world argued that O.J. Simpson was innocent? Do you know that? You guys are both lawyers, right?
He was.
Johnny Cochran.
Johnny Cochran, Alan Dershowitz.
Robert Shapiro.
Right?
They're all Jews.
A lot of... No, Johnny Cochran's not Jewish, right?
No, it's true.
Well,
hey, if the glove doesn't fit.
He did go to my law school, though.
Either way. But the fact that you have brilliant people who believe, or at least profess to believe something...
They didn't believe it. That's what they
maybe they did. Who knows what they believed? But the point is they argued successfully to that effect. The point is that if you have a motivation to have a certain result, then you're biased. And therefore your brilliance has to be thrown out. It's not fair to use that.
I don't know if it's mutually exclusive, though. It's like if someone threw a rock through the air and the rock hit a dog, and someone says, what injured the dog? All scientists would say, the rock. I see the rock's imprint on its forehead. And a Jew, the bigger picture, would say it was a person who threw the rock, threw the dog.
Okay, but this is...
There can still be natural selection within the rock.
I know, but that's another example.
I know what he said earlier.
That's another example. No, it's another example of what we said earlier, where we're trying to make it easier for people to come from by saying, oh, evolution, of course it's true, but the Almighty was at this switch, which may indeed be right. But the logical approach... What's the logical approach?
Maybe it's where how we grew up. It's just hard to do that. It's hard to
say.
Okay,
but think about it logically. Think about it logically. The thing is asinine, what they're saying. It's asinine.
It's not, though.
It's asinine. I'll tell you why it's asinine. First of all, you start from point A, right?
Yeah.
What's point A? You have an amoeba. Oh, you just happen to have had an amoeba. How do you get to a freaking amoeba?
I agree. That's a big
jump. You can't get an amoeba. What do you mean it's a big jump? The whole thing doesn't get started. We start with the most complex thing that possible. Let's start with the most... Why would we start with an amoeba? Let's start with nothing. Inanimate matter. Forget about that. How do we get to matter to begin with? I have no idea. Let's start with matter. How do you get to an amoeba? You can't. It's too complicated. A self-replicating amoeba that sometimes has mutations. Where did that come from?
I agree.
It's so illogical. So the whole argument doesn't get started. But if you know that there's only one way for your son to be exonerated from his capital punishment a conviction that's looming, you'll come up with something. Correct?
Yeah.
Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Gun to your head, you'll come up with an argument?
Yeah.
For sure, right?
Yeah.
And you'll argue it vociferously and radically and animatedly?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a gun to the head of everyone. The fact that the Almighty's, the existence of the Almighty is clear and present, and the argument is so clear, and there's nowhere to argue. But the gun to your head, right? You're dead. You don't want... All the things that you want to do are now usher. Darn, we're screwed. Life's over. Okay, let's have the most brilliant minds furiously try to find a heter. Oh, and they came up with evolution, and it's so brilliant, and it's so this... And we'll start with the amoeba. Don't ask questions. We'll start with the amoeba, and then all 100 million species that have ever existed on planet Earth all came from that single amoeba. Wow. We don't need to rely on God. Lahate rice before Hesia. That's the answer. Now we can do a rice.
I think with the
So therefore, the fact that there's brilliant people, Adrabah, that proves nothing, right? It only proves brilliant people if they are not biased. If they're biased,
the most powerful thing you said is to go from non-life to life.
No, of course, and that's where I think a lot of people's Emunah come from. That's where, for me, that's one of the reasons why, not the reason, but that's where I think a big part of Emunah comes from. That's what start with this, logical reason and cycle. But it comes from this idea that there really is no logical answer besides that for how did everything start. We can't comprehend infinity. Right.
But I think anybody would say in this day and age you cannot create life. Nobody would say that.
But they're trying though. That every time they find the amino acids on an asteroid. No, but they think they say it's only a matter of time until we find out how.
Okay, but they can't do it.
No, I agree. Yeah, no one said they can't do it. But everyone thinks they're about to figure it out.
So would it just happen randomly? It doesn't make sense.
It's insane. It's insane. I tell you, under other circumstances, the only reason why these people are not put in a mental home
is because there's 90% of the world.
The only people that will put them in the mental home are the people that are so glad that they finally have something to hang their hats on. So they're indebted to them because they found a heter, so to speak. Right? I told you, I can find a loophole that allows you to steal money from the government for free as much as we want.
Hey.
But it's totally free and it's totally legal. Of course, you like this. This is great. This is wonderful. Most brilliant minds in finance and economics and tax and all that. They came up with this. Wow, we could cheat the government out of whatever we want. Amazing. Vacations for everyone, right?
Yeah, free miles.
Exactly. Right? If someone told you that, why would you be motivated to try to actually investigate the veracity and legitimacy of what they're saying?
It's like Enron. As long as the stocks are going up.
Exactly. Don't ask, don't tell, don't pursue.
Why look deeper?
If we were able to isolate just logic, right? Every healthy logic would reject evolution flat out. Flat out. Problem is that the most brilliant minds in science, or some of the most brilliant minds in science, think it's true. Do you know why? Because they have skin in the game.
For sure.
They are hired as defense attorneys for sinners.
Yeah.
And defense attorneys for sinners, therefore, they get paid to do that, and therefore their testimony, their argumentation holds no water. Huh?
That guy, what's the name of that guy who's in a wheelchair and can barely move?
Hawkins.
So he doesn't really. I don't know how he would chase Taiba. He's can barely move. What's
you kidding? Google it. I'll tell you. That'll tell you.
Well, these people, a lot of times, they write entire treatises against the idea of a god, so that they have very much.
Plus, remember, if he's subservient to God, then he's not the brilliant guy that everyone looks up to.
Man.
Yeah, he's not like the people idolize.
Okay.
That's true.
Plus, by the way, if you Google him, you'll find that he did have some sort of altercations with ethics.
See that, actually,
that's
now
right.
that I think about it. It's disgusting.
Sicko. Either way, that's my point, and I really think it's if that's what I think is true. Now, yes, is it possible he might have used evolution to create the world? Absolutely. I'll tell you absolutely. Okay, I'll tell you that absolutely. We don't know, right?
Yeah.
It's insane, but people start with the supposition that evolution's true because all the brilliant scientists say it's true, and from that, let's work backwards. Is Torah compatible with science? Right?
Yeah.
No, that's not the way to work.
I agree.
Clearly, the world had a creator. Not a question. Not a shiloh. There's no shred of a doubt whatsoever to that. Now, okay, well, how did he do it? We don't know. The Torah gives us 31 verses. What are we supposed to do with 31 verses? We have no idea how they might create the world. Is it possible that it's with evolution? Maybe. Is it possible that it's not with evolution? Maybe. We have no idea.
Yeah.
So the evolution does not negate the existence of the Almighty. And therefore, we can say, we believe in evolution. Fine. Provided that we expressly acknowledge that this is a method the Almighty employed. That's fine.
For sure.
But to say, even to entertain that the fact that so many people believe it, that therefore it's substantiated, it doesn't mean anything. A lot of people believe a lot of silly things that were wrong. Some of the most brilliant minds that have ever crept upon this earth believed in heliocentric model. Does that mean that it's right because they believed it because they're so smart?
The right one.
I'm sorry, in the geocentric one. Who's to say it's the right one? Prove it to me. Yeah. Okay, fine. But does that mean anything?
No, of course not.
But you don't think there's any smart Buddhists out there?
Probably.
So do you think it makes sense to do what they do? Of course not. Illogical. So what? So what does it prove? What does it prove? Doesn't do anything. Right? Your intelligence is only as good as what is motivating you to do.
Yeah.
If your intelligence is motivating you to find truth, you'll get there. And you don't even need to be that brilliant. How you doing there, Eric?
I'm hanging in there. But
Yes.
I don't know how much longer I have.
Okay,
Are
so
we
let's-
going to get to the Avoda? We're just...
It's very long.
Let's stop here. We'll continue. Maybe we'll do it next week. I apologize, but I enjoyed that.
It's a good one. No, me too.
I enjoyed that
I
a
think
lot.
it's great. I don't have a problem with it.
I enjoyed that a lot.
This is about-
But
okay,
that
so
Gemara, I
I'm
think
gonna
that
go.
Gemara is the key to unlocking this. That Gemara in Sanhedrin.
Oh.
That the reason why the Jews did Avodah Zarah, no, the reason why Jews did Avodah Zarah, lahat lehem arayos.
I believe it.
Huh?
I believe it.
That's the reason why. Why would there be millions of people that would bow down to idols? It doesn't make any sense.
We don't really get it anyway, though.
Huh?
We don't
Well,
really
they
get
had
that.
a taiva for
Yeah,
it.
we don't get the type of that.
Okay, that's the other Gemara. That's the other Gemara. This Gemara says that it's not because of that, it's because of arayos.
Yeah. If they did this, the women like them.
No, it's just that once there's no God in the picture, you can do whatever you want, right? Everything is now open. Everything's legal. Everything's
Like
okay.
Hitler, right?
That's right. You
Jews
give us
conscious of the world.
exactly.
Why would women pray to it then?
What?
Taiva's more by men.
Well, who's to say that the women, indeed, that the women didn't do Avodah Zarah as much, right? By the age rolls, only the men, right?
That's a good point. That would be a riot then.
Well, the Gemara brings the kasha on that by saying, "Oh, there's a little kid who doesn't have a taivas nashim, therefore, why would he want to do Avodah Zarah?" The Gemara responds,
Peer
I think, by
pressure.
saying that's not peer pressure, but it's indoctrination. But at the core, it was just about that.
Yeah.
And I really think that's what evolution is. It's not logical. It doesn't make sense that smart people would do things that are logical unless they're paid to do it, or not paid necessarily in dollars,
Yeah.
but they're
If that's
paid.
what they want.
Exactly. That's the desired outcome. If that's a desired outcome, you'll find a way. Life will find a way, right?
Jurassic Park.
That's right, baby. Give you the
Yeah,
shout out.
seriously?
Life will find a way, right?
Yeah.
And do you think OJ is innocent? No. Why? Because healthy logic determines that declares that he's not innocent. But smart people argued for it. So what? They're paid to do it. So if you're paid to do it, or if you have any skin in the game, then your testimony is invalidated. So all those people have skin in the game, their testimony is invalidated.
We have
Voila.
skin- we have skin
No
in the game,
smart
too.
people said, huh?
You kind of skin in the game too, though.
Okay, so that's why I have to judge it based on logic alone. I agree with you.
I hear.
All right, I'm going to go.
Trevor, this
Okay.
is wonderful.
I'll see you in the morning.
Okay, take care.